Have you ever tried to get in shape but couldn't stick to a regimen because of lacking willpower and discipline? Have you been taught to exhaust yourself to the end, fighting your body's urges only to lose the battle, feel ashamed and get labeled as one who fell off the wagon? If that is the case, that makes us too. I fell off the wagon back in 2013 and actually never got on it again. Being the second of 3 parts, this video shares some lessons I learned about willpower and discipline while building and improving the physique you see on the screen. The first part summarized what I think are the best dietary tactics to stay lean and muscular, and the third will cover the training approaches I see in the same way. Placed in between, this one examines the role of willpower in body recomposition from a person who stays in the shape you see year around. Why I'm putting it in the middle is because 1. I believe willpower and discipline need a better explication regarding getting in shape and many other things, and 2. Not being idealistic regarding them can immensely help improve your results with that and training. As mentioned in the previous video, this content's purpose isn't to argue with others. Instead, I have 2 aims. The first is to hopefully inspire you, go and do something about your physique after watching this video, rather than playing another, falling into a rabbit hole. Whether you consider the information I share is optional. In fact, I urge my clients and readers to always be skeptical and approach things like scientists. That means testing things firsthand and comparing your empirical results so you can develop an actually non-biased perspective like a real scientist. The second is to provoke you consider body recomposition as an impacting your whole life, understanding it can cause plenty of misery but also improve your entire being, not just look. And that wholly depends on how you approach it. Conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom often explains obesity as overconsumption of calories and sedentary lifestyle caused by a lack of willpower and discipline. According to gurus and influencers, getting in shape is all about the latter, and essentially this translates into 2 things. 1. Using willpower to prevent your body from eating something or at all, and 2. Force feeding certain numbers of calories of foods it often, let's just say, doesn't necessarily enjoy. The latter includes undereating and never getting satiated. As evident by examples like the Biggest Loser TV show, that can cause tremendous anxiety, but whether it is actually effective, we'll see in a moment. The more extreme cases. In more extreme scenarios, gurus advocate approaching going to the gym and everything in life similarly. While the third outcomes will be discussed in another video, we will focus on body recomposition, examining what that actually means in day-to-day living. For that, we will have to look at the scientific models of willpower, a thorough examination of which you can find in my book, Discipline or Something Else. Willpower Model 1. The Muscle/Resource Model. Popularized by Roy Baumeister, the more classic perspective on willpower is that it's like a muscle or resource that gets fatigued and depleted as you use it. Hence, the more you do that, the less willpower you can exert. According to this school of thought, draining your willpower puts you in a condition called willpower or ego depletion, which includes decision fatigue. Adherents to this model explain that once your willpower is gone or depleted, you cannot use it, so simple tasks start feeling super challenging and your focus and performance go south. Thereby, you need to let your willpower get restored before using it again. Willpower Model 2. The Emotion Model. More recently, researchers like Michael Inslick reasonably argue willpower isn't a depletable resource since there isn't an actual resource to be depleted and measured. Instead, they outline the theory that willpower is an emotion that ebbs and flows and thus has its ups and downs. Delving into that perspective, authors like Nia Real offer willpower doesn't get depleted but is available for different things at different times. Question 1. Considering that, I'll be happy to know when was the last time your willpower was available for controlling cravings and hunger, and also for how long. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. The notion of fatigue. Since they see it as fluctuating, the proponents of the emotion model recognize willpower as very ineffective to rely on for pretty much anything, especially things that are 24/7 like your eating regimen. Instead, they recommend working with your identity, habits and the environment as far superior for achieving success. More on that in a moment. They also clarify that what others define as willpower or ego depletion is in fact very consistent with the notion of fatigue, which they recognize as tangible and measurable. Finding common ground with some concepts of Roy Baumeister's classic Willpower, the Secret Power of Success, the emotion model's proponents admit that exerting too many mental efforts inevitably leads to mental and in some cases physical fatigue. Most importantly, like those of the muscle or resource model, they agree that willpower is useless against biology and hormones, the disbalance of which is precisely the root cause of hunger, cravings and often sedentary living. While more about the what is in the adaptation chapters of my book OMAD Gains, I'll be happy to know whether some of that resonates with you. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. The prefrontal cortex. Scientists also found that using willpower to do something, stop yourself from doing something else, or take any action to pursue long-term benefit or goal are all associated with activity in different areas of the prefrontal cortex, which is where willpower comes from. The more these areas get used, the sooner mental and/or physical fatigue occurs, whether you call it willpower depletion. When the prefrontal cortex is somewhat altered due to an injury, the person's willpower and discipline automatically vaporize, and more on that can be found in Kelly McGonigal's The Willpower Instinct. Emotional eating and anxiety. That reminds us that humans have two parts of the brain that evolved at different times. Also known as the reasoning brain, the prefrontal cortex developed about 1 million years ago. It is responsible for planning, predicting, and reasoning. In fact, some consider all these functions of willpower, which is reasonable since they massively suffer in the cases of willpower depletion or mental fatigue. Besides that, we also have another more ancient brain, also referred to as the survival brain. This includes the autonomic nervous system, regulating primitive survival responses and urges. The survival brain is also where the actually addictive emotions of anxiety, stress, and worry emerge from. According to Judson Brewer, an MD and PhD at Brown University, worrying gives temporary distraction or relief from negative feelings. It is part of the reward-based learning system, which ensures our survival. This leads to craving more of those feelings, which invites various destructive habits to comfort oneself. Later, that turns into what Brewer defines as a habit loop. Part of that is the shame and guilt most people experience after binging or merely eating more than their data was. Let me know if that resonates with you. Shame and guilt. It is well established that shame and guilt lead to stress, anxiety, and indulging in self-destructive habits like binging and reinforcing the habit loop Brewer and others talk about. It is worth mentioning that feeding your mind baseless slogans like "you fell off the wagon" or "you're undisciplined" doesn't really help. Instead, it worsens things by initiating more shame and guilt, stress, and eating, and that is precisely why they call it emotional or compulsive eating. As Brewer says in his Unwinding Anxiety book, you become trapped in a cycle of despair and self-flagellation that will keep you on autopilot survival mode. This is crucial because when the person is stressed or anxious, their prefrontal cortex can shut down. When that happens, the old brain gets in charge, so the person has no impulse control. And while willpower is ineffective for fighting cravings when food addiction is less severe, it becomes unavailable when attempting to use food to comfort or ease oneself during a full-blown panic attack. Let me know what you think of that. Have you used emotional eating to cope with stress and negative emotions? And if yes, did you try using willpower to prevent yourself from such habits? If so, how that went? I'll be happy if you share some of your experiences in the comments below. Discipline. One of the fundamental questions I answer in my book Discipline or Something Else is whether self-discipline is self-sustained. Based on tons of research, the answer is no. Self-discipline is not self-sustained or self-sufficient. It largely depends on faculties and forces like willpower, grit, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, including one's specific desire for status, habits, and others. Thereby, discipline mimics or has an identical pattern or dynamic of the force or faculty through which it is sustained or kept. Because of that, I often liken discipline to an engine requiring fuel without which it doesn't go anywhere or doesn't work. And in the case of using willpower to sustain it, discipline inevitably follows the dynamics of willpower. This is very important because the permanent inner debate of when, how much, and what you should eat dramatically alters your ability to exert willpower. Now, this isn't to discourage you won't be able to pull from eating a cookie now. Instead, it is to help you understand that exerting willpower to fight your hormones is a lost battle with a very high price. And this is why, as my Instagram followers know, I firmly believe there's no such thing as free willpower. There's only free will. Relying on willpower now is paid or costs the inability to do that later and for something else. Use your willpower accordingly, never forgetting you have free will. What that actually means in practical terms is that exerting willpower now to sustain the discipline of not eating a cookie will likely alter the quality of that coding, writing, or designing session you planned for later. In the same manner, deciding to eat a salad instead of cake 5 times for 5 minutes will likely affect your overall experience for the day's resting hours. Eating without reaching satisfaction and making yourself hungrier initiate the inner debate of whether to eat more or wait for the next meal. That leads to remaking the same decision over and over again, eventually diminishing your executive function for the rest of the day. In more extreme cases, it can also increase stress to the point of leaving you willpowerless and very undisciplined. Question 3. Does any of this resonate with you? Have you recognized identical patterns in your or the lives of those around you? If so, in what manner? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Should you give up bodybuilding and healthy living? Now, does this mean abandoning healthy living and body recomposition and therefore surrendering to cravings to preserve willpower? Fortunately, it doesn't. It means making those independent from your willpower. Choice architecture. According to some of the latest research, one effective way to do that is by using choice architecture, also known as designing, or as I like to call it, disciplining your environment. The latter eliminates any potential cues of the habit you don't want to engage in. Instead, it saturates your life with the cues for the healthy and productive habits you actually want to develop. For instance, if you don't want to eat cookies or cake, don't have them in your house, you also go far from pastries and bakers. To learn how to code, you better have VS Code or another word processor installed, such as coding books around. Compassion. While people like James Clear and BJ Fogg glorify choice architecture, Judson Brewer regards it as somewhat ineffective due to working primarily as a distraction. Instead, he recommends practicing mindfulness and cultivating compassion for ourselves and even our cravings. Along with this, he advocates adopting what is called a growth mindset, which is basically the perspective that nothing is fixed and change is available to us. Brewer explains that doing this will allow deconstructing the destructive habit and recognizing the damage it does clearly outweighs the pleasure it provides, but that likely taps into some willpower since decision making is involved. So which of them is really the solution? Well, neither and both. Common sense. While choice architecture might be an excellent approach when it comes to learning a skill or quitting particular bad habits, it has its limitations. In the same way, though essential, merely being compassionate and non-biased about your cravings won't necessarily eradicate them. Personal experience. As anyone who has ever had such issues knows, not having their substance of choice in their house won't prevent an addict from abusing it. It will only postpone it. Yet, drugs are expensive, illegal, and associated with numerous obstacles, risks, and real dangers, which can more easily outweigh the high as long as you're ready to change and recognize them. Food, on the other hand, is mainly cheap, legal, and instantaneously available. Despite urban subculture, doing drugs is considered shameful and utterly unacceptable, whereas eating is encouraged 24/7. In fact, most of the gurus who adore using phrases like "you fell off the wagon" encourage frequent eating, including some of the most addictive foods. Moreover, in some former Soviet countries, grandmas consider fat kids healthy, and most people subconsciously associate pizzas, cookies, and cakes with their childhood and family gatherings. This is crucial because such notions are imprinted in your subconscious and either facilitate or hinder whatever measures you take when your willpower is at its lowest. Biology again. Besides that, there's biology again. The good news is that you are meant to advance. While you can learn new habits or skills, growing new neural connections, your body isn't made to crave drugs in any shape or form. The bad news, on the contrary, is that our bodies are made to store and are actually great at that. The way they see it is that this will make us survive during a potential famine, which is technically correct, although it prevents you from having visible ups and separation. And that is precisely where the issue needs to be addressed. On a biological level, by patiently working with your hormones to eradicate hunger and cravings. While what's likely the most complete manual to achieving that is in my book OMAD Gains, the first part of this video covers some basics you may find valuable. 80 to 90%. According to Vince Gironda, nutrition is about 80 to 90% of bodybuilding. What some people blatantly continue to neglect is that suppressing hunger makes succeeding in those 80 to 90% effortless. It also frees tons of willpower we can use for meaningful things like building our best selves. And while not getting remotely close to certain foods is unrealistic, in my humble opinion, choice architecture still applies here. Undergoing a hunger suppression process and developing a new relationship with food essentially erases any potential need to make such choices, which is a choice architecture in and of its own. Just like fasting is staying on a deficit of calories for extended periods, and eating OMAD is technically a form of calories in, calories out by alternating 2-hour stage of calories in with a 20 or 22-hour stage of calories out. Training. Okay, but what about training? After all, that plays a huge role too. Well, yes, and that is precisely why you should never make your workouts depend on willpower. Instead, I suggest making your whole training what people like James Clear would define as an identity-based habit and really find the joy in it. For instance, when I began my journey, the people who inspired me the most were Serge Nubret, Frank Zane and Vince Gironda, such as some others from the early 90s like Lee Haney and Mike Christian. Besides proponents of the health-promoting and muscle-building foods I mentioned in the first part, they all trained with high volume and frequency. I wanted to look like them, so I started copying and later customizing their training and making that part of my identity. I am a gym rat and I adore training and getting a pump, such as how I look and feel. Deep within, I perceive myself as a non-competitive natural bodybuilder. So my training is non-negotiable and independent of willpower, discipline and even choice architecture. So I can proudly say I haven't used any willpower for my training for the past decade. It is close to decade actually. Now, suppose for some reason you cannot recognize bodybuilding training as a part of your identity, but really want to do one of those shortcut programs with weird exercises. In that case, I suggest having realistic expectations and some compassion regarding the results you get. So what's the moral of all this? Well, the moral isn't that willpower is particularly bad. Instead, it is a priceless force or faculty that, depending on how you look at it, has its limitations and can even be plain unavailable under stress. This is why you should never make your health and body recomposition depend on it, but plan your life accordingly and use it for that extra hour of coding, handling your business, writing, or working on your big project on Friday night. As my Instagram followers also know, if you use it wisely, you'll be able to do the extra lap or mile with the help of willpower. If you don't, you'll have to do all the laps or miles relying on willpower. And that's precisely why I firmly believe that if sustaining your eating regimen requires willpower, including decision making, your eating regimen has already failed you, as mentioned in the previous video. But all this is just my opinion, which may or may not resonate with you. Whatever the case, I'll be happy if you let me know your take on the topic. Feel free to share that, such as your personal experiences with using willpower to sustain an eating or training regimen. Also, your suggestions for videos to do after finishing this series. Otherwise, like this video if you think it provides value, subscribe to this channel for more content like this, check my other works if you're into tech reviews and magic with a K, also my coaching services by DMing me on Instagram, know my music and articles are on Spotify and Medium, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for your time.